Dustin Burrows, walked out when he couldn't get the 2/3, and he left, and they never came back. And so right now it's 57 for David Cook and 31 for Dustin Burrows. And Dustin Burrows said on a video very famously he would never support a speaker who tried to do that. Now that he's running for speaker, it's a different story.
Ready to roll?
Yep.
All right.
Real Texan.
Why should this matter to real Texans? Thanks for joining this episode of Real Texans, talking to folks who are doing real things to make the Lone Star State shine brighter for every Texan. And today, sitting down with the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, been our Lieutenant Governor since 2015 after being elected in 2014. Governor Patrick, when you started, though, you didn't start Lieutenant Governor, you ran for the Texas Senate. You had a very successful career as a broadcaster, both television and radio. You had what I think most folks would think of as a nice, comfortable life, and then you decided to run for the Texas Senate. Walk folks through how you came to the decision to kind of trade in your nice, comfortable life for taking a lot of shots and doing a lot of crazy things in politics.
So I always look at the hand of God in all things in life, Michael, and I look at a life as a maze. And if you listen to God's direction, you'll get out of the maze. If you don't, you keep walking around and bumping into hedges, which I did for a lot of my life before I found Jesus. And so I was on vacation in 2005, and we came back a little early, and I arrived at my house, and I had a phone call from someone who I didn't know who had gotten my number and said, I'm running for Senate seat so-and-so, and I'd like to have your endorsement. And I said, well, I don't know who you are, but tell me about this. And he said, well, there are 3 Senate seats open. So my point is, I wasn't even thinking about running. This was already late August, early September of 2005. There were already 3 people in the race running for Senate District 7, 3 powerful people, 2 House chairmen and a city council person. And at that time, my son was out of college. My daughter was in college, and it wasn't on my bucket list. But what had happened in my life, Michael, is that I was a sportscaster for a long time in television in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Joe Biden's home, oddly enough, in my first job, and then Washington, D.C., where I worked with Al Roker. He was the weather guy, was the new young sports guy, and we came in together on the same day. And then I came to Houston with Channel 11, and that was my focus. And then I bought a radio station, and the guy named Rush Limbaugh called one day in 1988, I guess it was, in the summer of 88. He couldn't get on anywhere. You have to be on in major markets. I bought this station out of bankruptcy. I had nothing to lose at all by putting him on the air. And so I talked to him. I listened to his audition tape. I said, man, where has this guy been? And if you go back to Rush Limbaugh, he was the first of his kind, quite frankly. And he was saying things that people were thinking about that they hadn't heard before. So I put him on the radio station in 1988. And over time, I just got to the point where, long before running for office, I decided I wanted to talk about more important things than ball scores. And I loved it, but I just didn't want to do that anymore. And I didn't want to retire just giving ball scores and talking about, some player trade or whatever it was. I wanted to do something more meaningful with my life. And so I started doing my show after Rush. And so I started to pick up a pretty big audience, and I got very involved in political issues. And so over, I guess then it was not quite 20 years, but 15 or 16 years of doing conservative talk radio, that I was really invested in the issues. But I wasn't thinking about running for office. It wasn't like on my bucket list. But when I got home from that vacation, Michael, and I talked to this person, I found out there was the Senate seat open. I said, you know what? I know the issues. I know how Republicans at that time were very upset with the blocker bill that didn't give us power to have a majority rule in the Senate. And so I made the decision to run. And the Lord had given me a little bit of a blessing of some money in my radio business. So, because you have to kind of self-fund when you start out. No one wants to give you money. And everyone said, Dan Patrick can't win. He's the radio guy. And we won almost 70% of the vote in a 4-way race, which was unheard of. And I was outspent, 5-6 to 1. But we won easily because we knew the issues. And so that's how I got into politics.
So I want to transition to, to that decision then to run for lieutenant governor, because again,
Yes.
you had kind of a let's say a rocky or maybe not rocky. They kind of wanted you to be quiet.
Yes.
I think the Austin establishment did all they could to kind of shut up freshman state senator Dan Patrick. How do I say this politely to you? You don't take direction well, apparently, because you did manage to make your voice heard. And you had a pretty good run going there in the Texas Senate. Why then run for lieutenant governor? You're running against an incumbent. What motivated you to take that pretty crazy step to go from, you may have had a radio station in Houston, but you didn't have a radio station around the state, and yet you managed to beat an incumbent. Walk us through that process, if you don't mind.
Well, I had discovered, Michael, and this is a good message for all conservatives who get elected. You can do one of two things. You can throw bombs all the time, or you can try to actually get things done, because that is the purpose of running for office. And so I probably was a little bit of a bomb thrower in my first session. I guess I was a little bit. But what I also was I was very knowledgeable in the issues. I knew how to ask good questions from all my years in the media. And then I became a chairman of education in 2013. And then in 2013, if you remember, Jimmy Don Aycock and I were new chairman of education in the House and Senate, and we made a dramatic change. I authored the rewrite and the first big rewrite of a charter school bill so that we could have more public charters because they were really working well, and we had some bad ones we had to close. And Jimmy and I agreed that we needed to reduce the STAR test from 15 to 5. And the 4x4, where everybody had to graduate with 4 courses in English, social studies, math, history. I forget the combination of tests. It was a combination. And it was really a way to force every kid to go to college, which is a great goal, but not every kid needed to be in college. So we decided to bring that down. It was too much testing. And some kids don't want to go to college. They want to have a career. They want to go into the military, whatever. So when that happened, then Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, who's a fine person, I have no issue, but he said he was against that. And the lieutenant governor then said, well, you're not going to be chair of education next session. So once you become a chair of a committee, it's a very powerful position. I just said, what am I doing here? I make $600 a month like every other senator, which is fine. We know that going in, but I'm away from my family a lot. I've worked really hard. And because he disagrees with me over something that the people want, so I just really made a decision that I wasn't coming back. I said, 8 years I've served. That's enough. I've done a good job. I passed a lot of legislation, put under God in the state Senate, in God we trust, put under God in our state pledge, fought for property tax relief and Second Amendment bills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Did a lot of good things. And then we had the Wendy Davis filibuster, if you remember. And that was all caused, Michael, by the fact that the lieutenant governor at the time took out language out of a Glenn Hager bill that said, you couldn't have an abortion after 20 weeks. And Dewhurst took that out. And I went to the lieutenant governor and said, Governor, the House is going to add it back. It's going to come back over here, and we're going to run out of time and be in a filibuster situation. And he disagreed. And that's what happened. And Joe Strauss held that bill, didn't for a couple of days, sent it back with the 20 weeks in it, as I knew he would. And that led to the filibuster. And that filibuster was a disaster. And I sat there and I just realized we needed new leadership. And by that time, Jerry Patterson, good guy, friend, Todd Staples, I didn't know as well, but good guy. They had already announced they were running against him. So I sat there and I thought to myself at my desk, I don't have to beat Dewhurst because he's not going to win. He'd already lost to Ted Cruz 2 years earlier. I need to beat Patterson and Staples. And so my decision was, if I did decide to come back as a senator, because I knew Dewhurst wouldn't be back, I would sit there and say, I got to beat that guy. So I decided that I had the experience. I felt like I was the conservative leader we needed, and I decided to run. And everyone once again said, Dan can't win. He's the radio and TV guy, and he's a senator. And these guys have been statewide elected for, at that point, more than a decade, and they had more money than I had to run. And To everyone's surprise, I got 45% of the vote, close to that in the first round. Dewhurst got like 24%. The other two were out, and they're still friends. We work with them today in their various jobs. In fact, I appointed Jerry Patterson to a historic committee that we had. So no hard feelings there. And Todd Staples is the head of Texoga. We work together. So no hard feelings there. But I got 43%. Or 45%, and everyone was surprised, including us. We were just trying to finish second, like Ted Cruz did, follow that model. And then, we won 66-34, and that's how I became lieutenant governor. All of those things, Michael, were not planned. You got to understand that. I hadn't planned to run for office the first time. I didn't even know how to run a campaign. I knew the issues. And then lieutenant governor, I was ready to exit. And probably all the House members and some Republicans in the Senate, not today, but in the past, probably said, if Dewhurst had just left him with chair of education, we wouldn't have Dan Patrick as lieutenant governor. So that's how it happened.
Yeah. I want to stick on the education theme for a second here. Coming into 2025, you had said that school choice was going to be your top legislative priority
Yes.
for this new legislative session that kicks off on Tuesday. You've clearly invested a lot in that issue up until now. Why is school choice so important to you, and why do you think it's important to Texas?
Well, first of all, parents have a right to choose the school that's best for their child. Bottom line. I mean, that's the easy answer. A little bit more than that. I only serve on one board outside the Senate, and it's called Be an Angel, beanangel.org for anyone who wants to look it up. I've been on it since 1988. I've raised, they say, about $25 million for it. And we work with children with disabilities in our public school system. That's what we do. And we're one of the biggest now. That we started out with 5 people in a small budget. And today we have a lot of people in a large budget. And we serve so many thousands of children, Dallas, Houston, all areas we've expanded. But there are a lot of schools, Michael, that just can't help a child with a specific disability, physical or mental. And most of they just can't. They don't have the trained teachers. Other schools do a great job of it. So the first thing, if you look at our school choice bill that we passed last time, that the House killed, thanks to our former speaker, is that it puts an emphasis on children with disabilities and those parents. If they need to move their child to another school, it gives them a means of this grant, education savings grant, to help them. So that's really important. I don't think anyone can argue with that. Number 2, the design has always been for school choice is to get kids out of failing public schools and give those parents a chance. We have a long line, thousands and thousands of people who are in line in wait to go to a public charter. We have a lot of failing schools. You got to remember, Michael, we have 9,000 campuses in Texas, 1,200 school districts, which is 1,200 superintendents and 9,000 principals and assistant principals and 300 and some thousand teachers. And most of our public schools are actually very good. Most of them are good, but they're not all good. And so, our school choice bill that we had last time, and we'll pass again, focuses on those students in failing schools, children with disabilities, but universal, so that every parent can have an opportunity of this grant that goes to the school, not to the parents. So it's spent on education. And because you may have a child in an A or B school, but that child doesn't fit that school. Maybe they're being bullied, whatever it is. You have a right. And nationally, I'll just wrap up this answer. I don't want to take up all our time on one topic because we have a lot to talk about. But nationally, like Florida has been, the leader. 25 years they've had school choice, but it was only for children with disabilities for 25 years. Just under DeSantis, it changed. So we will have the biggest school choice program, universal, in the country. We've passed it now, I guess, 5 times. I passed it in 15, I think it was, in 17, a couple of times. The House never gave it a hearing. We passed it several times last session in that ongoing session, and Dade failing killed it at the end. And so I believe we have the votes, and we're going to pass it. We need to pass it early, get it behind us. And I'll just close with this. All the people involved in public school, and we have so many great Republican teachers and great Republicans who are involved in schools. Don't believe this argument that school choice, Michael, will hurt public education. And I'm just going to say this once. People can rewind it back to write it down. We have 5.5 million students in public schools, 5.5 million, with a $39 billion budget. Our program, which will be the biggest in the country for school choice, is for 62,000 children, roughly, at about $700 million. So There's a big difference. You're never going to grow up to 5.5 million. We don't want to grow up. In fact, nationally, only 3% of parents and students opt for school choice in their states. Why? Because kids like their friends. They don't want to leave. Most parents like their schools. Most schools are good. But for those kids I mentioned, they have that right. That parent has that right. So this malarkey of we're going to undermine and the Republicans and Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick want to get rid of public education is just a bald-faced lie.
One of the critiques that we hear on the right about school choices, oh, this is going to hurt private schools, government's going to take over the homeschool. How do you address those kind of concerns? What kind of safeguards, guardrails will be in place to stop that from happening?
First of all, we're a state of 30 million people, and nothing we ever do is not going to have some opposition. Our school, our friend Tim Lambert at the Homeschool Association supports what we've done because we also have help for homeschoolers. We're not going to let one of the things that we'll guard against this session, and if the House tries this, they want to make the private schools take the same test as the public schools. No. Then it turns into a public school. We're not going to do that. Greg Abbott doesn't support that. I've never supported that. And so that's what we're going to do. And people say, well, how can you hold them accountable? How can you know they're doing a good job? Well, how do I know a homeschool parent is doing a good job? That's up to the parent. And that parent who gets that grant in the lottery to, have their child go to a private school, it's up to the parent to hold the school accountable. Are their students getting a good education? Are they meeting standard for their grade level? It's up to the parent. We don't need government to tell parents what a good school is. Parents can make that decision on their own.
I want to shift gears for a second. Coming into this legislative session, coming up on Tuesday, you lead the Senate, and I know that you generally kind of keep yourself with your 31 senators and helping them represent their constituents as senators.
Yeah.
But, obviously you know what's going on just to the west of you on the other side of the Texas Capitol.
I've heard about something.
You've heard a couple things there. There's been a lot of discussion about Democrats chairing committees in the Texas House. You had Democrats chairing committees in the Texas Senate for a while. You've ended that practice. Why is it? You had one, John Whitmire, who's now the mayor of Houston. You've ended that practice. Why is that practice an important one? Why do you think for so many Texans that's an important practice to come to an end in the Texas House?
So I don't want to go too deep in the weeds, Michael, because most people just want us to get the job done. They don't care about the process. But if you're going to be successful, you have to kind of master the rules, and you have to understand why bills get killed, good conservative legislation. And so I learned over the years, but this is something I learned right away. When I was a senator, we had, I think Dewhurst had 18 committees. He had 6 Democrat chairs, as I recall, 6, and 12 Republicans. My first question was, well, what about the other 8 Republicans? Why aren't they committee chairmen? I mean, we're the majority party. And so I campaigned on I was going to get rid of all Democrat chairs. And I always said I might keep 1 or 2. I kept 1 in that first session, John Whitmire. But on that committee, because he had been over our prison systems forever, and he and I agreed, he's now the mayor of Houston, and he's tough on law and order. He supports the police and doesn't believe in defunding. But John's always been an old line Democrat who believed in law and order. So, he was over criminal justice and the prison systems, but I had him surrounded by all Republicans. So John couldn't pass a bill or get a bill out if he wanted to. And if he tried to stop a bill, I just moved it to another committee, which he never did. And then, so we had 1. And then one session, I put Eddie Lucio, a chair of a committee for 1 session. And Eddie was a pro-school choice Democrat. Eddie was a pro-life Democrat. Eddie had a record that was almost the same in terms of his voting record as one of our Republicans who's no longer there. Eddie was a conservative Republican, old line. And so I had him there for 1 session, and then it went back to 1. And then now Whitmire became mayor. So I don't have any Democrat chairs. But, the House tries to say, well, Dan Patrick, one was more conservative than a Republican in the Senate and a lot of Republicans in the House. And the other, we had him surrounded by Republicans. But here's why it matters. And I learned this very early. if you're on a committee and the Democrat is the chair is all powerful. He determines which bills are heard and which bills are voted on and which bills are sent up to calendars in the House or to me for a floor vote. And so a Democrat chair, and I don't blame them. If I'm in the minority, I'm going to use every tool I can. I understand. They would just simply say, Senator Patrick, I'd like to pass your bill out a committee. I'd like to give it a hearing, but, I need a vote on the floor to get my bill passed, and you help me with that. I'll help you with you. And there's no quid pro quo, but you get the message. You know what I mean? And so that you put a Democrat chair, they're in charge of everything that comes out of that committee. And we've seen that in the House for years, how Joe Moody has bottled up bail reform over in the House for years, how senators Democrats who had in charge of major committees didn't let bills out of committees that conservatives wanted. So that's one reason you don't want Democrat chairs. The second reason is you're bypassing a lot of great conservatives who would be great chairmen and pass out these bills that we send over. So when I came in 2015, remember the blocker bill that we had to go to a Democrat because it took 21 votes to bring a bill to the floor, only 16 to pass it, simple majority. Well, my first session, we changed the rules in the Senate. We changed it to 19. The members, I had 8 new members like Connie Burton and Don Huffines and Paul Betancourt and Bob Hall and others. And they campaigned on that and we changed it. The members voted, changed the rules. So the Democrats couldn't stop us anymore. And then I got rid of 5 out of the 6 Democrat chairs. We changed all the rules so that we don't have rules that Democrats can use against us. There's nothing wrong with that. We work across the aisle. Look, 98% of the bills that we pass are passed with Democrats as well, because 50% of the budget's education, 30-some% is healthcare. That's 80-some% of the budget, 2 items. And the Democrats are against school choice, for example, but they'll come on board for other issues. And, when we passed the $100,000 homestead exemption, when I came in, it was 15. Now it's 100,000. I had 31 members backing me up, every Republican, every Democrat. So there are bills that we work across the aisle. But I knew this, Michael. Here's what I knew as a senator. When I was a senator, I would have to go and ask the Democrat caucus chairman, could I bring my Second Amendment bill up? And they'd say, nope. That's why they call it the blocker bill. 11 of us are going to block you. You only have 20 votes. And I got tired of that, Michael. And so we don't have to do that anymore. They abused it. And I think in the House, the reason a lot of people watching this interview, and it was a big issue in the primaries last year, they don't want Democrat chairs because the Democrats have abused it. They're running the House. When you have a speaker that has been elected, Joe Strauss started it. I think there were 12 or 14 Republicans and all the Democrats. Right. Picked a Republican speaker.
Right.
And so, this is something so simple to understand. The reason the lieutenant governor, not me as a person, I'm just on the office, is considered the most powerful lieutenant governor in the country is I appoint the chairs of the committee. I appoint the members of the committee. I decide which bills come to the floor. And that gives the lieutenant governor of Texas power. That's why you read it's so powerful in the legislative process. But beyond that, Michael, I get elected by the people watching right now across the state. I think we had 8 or 9 million, whatever it was, 10 million that voted for us in 2022. And Greg Abbott and I won by, 900,000 or a million votes. I'm beholden to the people. In the House, there's 150 members that pick the speaker, and whoever gets 76 is speaker. And who are they beholding to? The people who elect them. So if you have a chair, a speaker who gets elected by, 15, 20, 25 Republicans and all the Democrats, you can't serve 2 masters. There's a verse about that in the Bible. And so what happens is people don't even notice what happens, but bills go over there and they die, or they get watered down, or they pass out, but it's too late to get them off the calendar. Oh, well, we were going to pass it. We ran out of time. And the other thing that happens, Michael, and this is even worse, in the Senate, I have a rule. I had a rule from day one. If I can't get 15 or 16 out of 19 or 20 Republicans, depending on how many I had, we're not passing a bill off the floor. So we never in the Senate pass a bill over to the House with all the Democrats and a few Republicans, if that makes sense, because it takes now 18 votes to bring a bill to the floor. I'll never pass a bill off the floor with 11 Democrats and 7 Republicans. I'm not going to do that. In the House, they do that all the time. They pass bills out that all the Democrats want and only a handful of Republicans want, but they get to their 76 votes and ship it over to us, and I kill them all. So why do they do that? Number one, it wastes time on the floor, hours and hours of debate, because if it's a bill that most Republicans don't like, they're going to be debating against it and talking against it from the back mic. Secondly, they do it because when you get the Democrat votes, if you're the speaker, Joe Strauss, Dade Phelan, for example, if you get the speaker's role, here's what you say to the Democrats. Look, Dan Patrick's going to kill that bill. The Senate's not ever going to pass that bill, and Governor Abbott's not going to sign it. But if you want to pass that bill so you look good back in your district, so you don't have any primary opponents, we'll spend 3 or 4 hours a day to talk about it. That's the dirty secret that Dustin Burrows doesn't want to tell anybody or anyone else supporting him. That's the dirty secret. And so they chew up the time with Democrat bills. Again, we don't send any bills to them with all, any major bills or any mid-sized major. We don't send any bills to them that have all Democrat support and a handful of Republicans. We don't do it. They do it all the time.
So I promise I'll move us on to a couple issues, but I want to get one quick question. I'm trying very hard not to drag you into the issue du jour of who should be the Speaker of the Texas House. But I do want to ask you, something you just said struck me. In the Senate, you tried to make sure that legislation has a majority Republican support,
yes.
And if the Democrats sign on, supermajority. But if the Democrats sign on, then that's great, but it's not necessary for you. Right. It feels like in the Texas House, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a difference between a Speaker of the House who starts with the Republicans and then brings on Democrats versus a person running for Speaker who starts with the Democrats and then brings Republicans on. There is a difference there, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a big difference. And look, we have 88 Republicans now. I think a reasonable Republican voter would say, well, why can't you get 76? Because there's always 14 or 15 who just think they're more important than the voters. More important than the rules. By the way, the House rules say if any Republican gets 2/3 of the vote of members present, which David Cook got, that's the nominee we follow on the floor. Dustin Burrows walked out when he couldn't get the 2/3, and he left, and they never came back. And so right now it's 57 for David Cook and 31 for Dustin Burrows. And Dustin Burrows said on a video very famously he would never support a speaker who tried to do that. Now that he's running for speaker, it's a different story. And here's the bottom line with me, Michael. I don't care who the speaker is. It doesn't make any difference to me as long as they get elected, as you said, with the vast majority of Republicans and a few Democrats. Because it's unlikely any Republican gets 75 other Republicans. If a Republican gets 60 or 65 or 70 votes and needs a few Democrats to join them who aren't going to be chairs and who know they're not going to be chairs, to join them, then that's probably the only way a Republican gets the 2/3 of Republicans and the votes to get there. It's sad, Michael. It's really sad in a red state that Donald Trump loves, President Donald Trump loves, to think that we in Texas, of all places, will have a handful of Republicans willing to cede power to the Democrats. And they'll give all these excuses. Well, one's more conservative than the other. Their records are pretty much the same. Both of them had bad votes. Some of them had good votes. But it's the process. It's the principle. It should be Republican, the 2/3 majority of those voting present to pick the speaker, not the Democrats.
The future is often informed by the past. 2023, we saw the impeachment of Attorney General
Yes.
Ken Paxton in the Texas House. The Texas Senate, of course, exonerated Attorney General Paxton. You have now, for 480 some days, been calling on the Texas House to release the costs involved with that impeachment. Speaker Phelan has not. Maybe the next speaker will. But you've also pushed for reforms to the impeachment process. Why is that important to you?
So here's why it's important, Michael. When he was impeached last time, Ken Paxton, you have to go back to precedent that was set in 1917, I guess was the last case. There was another impeachment in 75, but an impeachment like of a statewide official. And they went through weeks and weeks of preparation. Every witness was put under oath. They were cross-examined. The person they were impeaching, the governor at the time, I believe it was the governor, was able to come in and defend himself. None of that happened in the House. They impeached Ken Paxton faster than it takes to cook a brisket, at a barbecue over Memorial Day weekend, the end of session. The members didn't even know what they were voting on. We didn't even know what they were doing over there. We were busy passing bills. And then we didn't know what the evidence was. We waited for the trial because no one had been put under oath. And as any fair-minded person who watched the trial knows, I was a fair judge, and our members acted properly in their acquittal because every one of their witnesses collapsed on the stand. Every one of them, no evidence. And so that shouldn't happen again. I want a future legislature to understand what happened that should never happen again.
Happier topic. Donald Trump coming in, Republican-controlled Congress.
Great.
You, the Senate, the House, the governor have all been pushing hard on border security. Is now the time for Texas let up, or do you think the legislature needs to continue pushing on border security measures in 2025?
We need to continue pushing. We have continued to put the same amount of money in the budget we had. Hopefully we don't have to spend it all, but we are going to be here side by side with the president, Tom Homan, and we are going to help them secure this border. We have to address the grid. We have to address water. We have to address affordable housing. And I've announced that I'm going to create a program like the cancer prevention program we have for dementia and Alzheimer's because it's impacting so many families. We have the power in Texas, Michael, to do something like that. One-time money into a program where we will attract, like we've done for cancer, we will attract the finest researchers from the world and the country to Texas and help like those in our great hospitals in Texas, because you can't get a grant unless you're in Texas. Because we have to address this is a disease. It's not only terrible for the person who has it, terrible for the caregivers. I've never announced anything, and I've announced a lot of big programs. I've never announced anything that's had such an overwhelming support from people. I just did a story today, and the guy that interviewed me, his mother died of Alzheimer's, and his dad had to take care of her 24/7 for 5 years. It's so tough. So that's a big issue. So water, grid, the DPRIT, the dementia program and prevention, affordable housing. And then I also, and this is the last thing I want to tell you, people have to be aware of if they're already not, is getting rid of a THC that's being sold in all these smoke shops and vape shops and stores around Texas to your kids who are buying products that have 3, 4, 5 times or more of the marijuana that's in a marijuana cigarette. And there's no age limit on it. In less than 2 years, Michael, 8,000 shops have opened up, a lot around schools. So we're going to ban these bad products. If they're good legal products, we'll regulate them, but we're going to ban these bad products because your kids and your grandkids, I hear from parents, grandparents, teachers, and the vaping is terrible. It is out of control, and we're going to deal with it in Texas.
Casino interests spent a lot of money trying to help Dade Field and others. Big push to expand the footprint of gambling. Where do you see that going in 2025?
Well, remember what I said earlier in the interview about the House passes bills over with all Democrats and a few Republicans? Well, they tried to pass a casino bill out. It was 3 votes short of what they needed. And you know who supported the bill? All the Democrats, and only 28 out of 88 Republicans voted for it. Some didn't vote. I think 18, white lighted or walked. But my point is there's another example of what people don't know what's going on. They pass a bill out that the 3 out of 4 Republicans didn't vote for, didn't want to vote for, but they sent it out anyway. So that they could say, well, Dan Patrick and the Texas Senate, killed that bill. No, Republicans actually over there, if they'd run their House right, if you get Republicans electing a speaker, that wouldn't have happened. So here's the deal. Greg Abbott has said this, and I've said this. If the votes are there and there's a bill, we'll look at what it is. But last session, 3 out of 4 Republicans were against it. In the Senate, out of 20 Republicans, I have maybe three who would vote for it. That's a long way from 15 or 16 out of 20 to get it to the floor. We're not going to pass bills that all the Democrats want and only a handful of Republicans want, and the House needs to stop doing that.
Yeah, excellent. Governor Patrick, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, sir.
All right, bye.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. And thank each of you for joining us in this conversation.